I've told the American people before that this will not be another Vietnam. And I repeat this here tonight. Our troops will have the best possible support in the entire world, and they will not be asked to fight with one hand tied behind their back.
The Vietnam War was a long, costly, and divisive conflict that pitted the Communist government of North Vietnam against South Vietnam and its principal ally, the United States. The conflict was intensified by the ongoing Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. Initially, American public supported involvement in Vietnam. However, by late 1967, most agreed with the statement that it was a mistake to have gotten involved in the war. The Vietnam War called into question the United States' reliance on high technology. Since World War II, the United States had pursued a policy of substituting machines for individuals in combat. This approach was costly, and in Vietnam, the benefits were hardly visible. By the end of the Vietnam War, America viewed the government as deceitful and misrepresenting of the truth, after the government guaranteed for years that the war was a certain victory and almost over. After the Tet Offensive paired with Watergate, credibility was lost by the American government and military and would not fully be regained until the Gulf War. In 1988, after ceasefire with Iran was signed, after the Iran-Iraq War, Iraq was heavily in debt and tensions in society were rising. Most of the debt they had was owed to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Iraq pressured both nations to forgive the debts, but they refused. The Iraq-Kuwait dispute also involved Iraqi claims to Kuwait as an Iraqi territory. Iraq also accused Kuwait of exceeding its OPEC quotas for oil production. In August of 1990, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein ordered an invasion and occupation of Kuwait. Alarmed by these actions, fellow Arab powers such as Saudi Arabia and Egypt called on the United States and other Western nations to intervene. Hussein defied the United Nations Security Council demands to withdraw from Kuwait. The first offensive by the UN began in 1991, in January. The first part was Operation Desert Shield, a massive bombing campaign led by American forces. Next was Operation Desert Saber, which began on February 24, 1991, a 4-day ground offensive that won America and the UN the brief war. Iraq lost around 30,000 soldiers, while America and the Allies only lost 292. Due to this being America's first offensive after the Vietnam War, the war itself was not widely popular, nor was the possibility of a draft for it. Because the war was fought so efficiently and quickly, the Gulf War became very popular afterwards, sending President Bush's approval rate into the mid-80%. The U.S. government needed so badly for the war to be a success, and even more for Americans to support it. Their success in Kuwait allowed for the U.S. government to regain their credibility and reliability in the eyes of the Americans. According to Major General Nash, a man who fought in both wars, the biggest differences between them were the support by the American people of the wars, the introduction of an all-volunteer army, no draft, during the Gulf War, the lack of ambiguity during the Gulf War, and even people who disagree with the war or policies do not direct that criticism towards the soldiers fighting the war. The people's response to the Vietnam War versus the Gulf War was so exponentially different because of how each war was portrayed by both the government and the media. The deceitfulness from the U.S. government about the actuality of the Vietnam War, paired with the 19 years that Americans were engaged in warfare there, is what caused the immense backlash and protests against the government during this time. During the Gulf War, these things did not occur. American soldiers on the ground were only there for 4 days, and the government was much more transparent and efficient about the whole situation. The transparency and efficiency during the Gulf War is how the American government was able to regain their credibility in the eyes of the American people after they won the war.